You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man whose IQ is nearly as high as Disney's subscription numbers. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm trying to work out if that's a compliment or not. 116. That's pretty low, isn't it?
116 is it's average.
Well, unless you mean 116 million, which in that case I'm kind of like uber intelligent.
It depends on where you get your news, Mark.
It totally does. Yeah, 116 and 160 million, slightly different quantities there. But that is going some, considering it's only been a year or so. Wow, we've kind of jumped straight into the news.
we feel like we have jumped straight into the news, and before we get to that, how are you, young man? I can still call you young man because it's not your birthday yet.
Counting down the days to the big 4-0. That's this Wednesday. I'm all right. Pretty tired again, actually. Had this kind of a second part of a 40th birthday celebrations. It's kind of a trilogy this year. So we did the Rebels the other weekend, and yourself and your fair lady came down as well, which was wonderful to see you guys. And then we did that really cool live podcast. Yes. And then last night, because I had a twin brother, I figured we should probably do a joint twin birthday celebration with all our school friends.
Oh, it's his birthday as well, is it?
It will be, yeah. In fact, 1 minute before mine. Still, after like 39, 40 years, bit bitter about that. But hey, we try not to mention it too often. So I did that last night. Got home about 2:30 in the morning. And then just because of a body clock, I was up at like 7:30. I'm just thinking, that's not right. I should go back to sleep. But I didn't. In fact, instead, kind of rewatched the final episode of The Bad Batch.
What has the week brought for you other than exhaustion?
I think actually it's the first week in ages where nothing has come through. I've got stuff which is winging its way from foreign lands. It's also that slightly dodgy ground whereby it's so close to my birthday that if I pick up something, especially something new that's maybe in the shops, I run the risk of having to have an awkward, I've already got that conversation with girlfriend or my mum.
It's the Star Wars Christmas annual that everybody gets, isn't it? We always end up with 3 of them.
Yeah, I used to get at least 1, if not 2 each year. The calendars, on the other hand, still a bit of a sucker for like buying lots of calendars which then sit in a drawer. But hey, what can you do? That's collecting for you. How about you, buddy? How's things?
Very good. Yeah, I had a few bits come in. I had a 1999 comic, a thing from Another World comic. I mentioned it when we talked about Doncaster Unleashed, and there's a photograph of it in the article. I just went online. I thought, I fancy that. I never got that back in the day, so I managed to pick that up for pennies. So that was kind of cool. And it's a weird shaped comic. It's more square. It's comic width, but not comic height. So it's a weird one. That was a cool thing to get. But other than that, not an awful lot of news and not an awful lot of collectibles coming, which is good because my wallet can breathe this week. But we're not going to take a foot of the gas today. We're going to do things slightly differently, I think, today. Whereas normally we'd go through the latest news and then talk about that latest episode of The Bad Batch. This week was the final episode of Season 1, Kamino Lost. So what did you make of this? It was action-packed. It was obviously, there was a lot to sort of resolve as much as they could because they've announced the Season 2. What did you make of this episode?
There was a lot of brooding going on, I felt. Did you not notice those long lingering looks and like crosshair and all that? There's a lot of kind of brooding going on. Yeah. I think, cards on the table, let's be honest, good, solid ending, but I think it would have worked better as a single episode. And you do get this sometimes with some TV series. The climax to a series or the season is like the penultimate episode. And then you get this kind of after the events of that episode, almost like an epilogue where you kind of like, things kind of slightly go back to normal before they then set up the next big bad or next, story arc for the next season. That kind of had this about it. A lot of the conflict and a lot of the drama and the tension, really, I felt was in the first part. Didn't really feel like they were too under the gun.
Did you not think that anyone was going to die then? Was there ever a moment when you thought, wow, one of these isn't going to make it out of here?
Only when they got onto the canister and after the droid had kind of said my batteries are running low. And I'm just thinking there's possibly going to be some kind of K2SO kind of sacrifice moment, where he's pretty much what he did, where he had powered on through until he literally, had nothing else to give, and then he powered down. No, I didn't ever feel like anybody was likely to die at all, really, in this episode. It was such a beautiful episode. I mean, and again, obviously, this episode was really beautiful. It wasn't quite as explosive as the previous episode. There's a lot of atmospheric lighting and stuff like that, which looked great in HDR. And I can understand where people are kind of saying it's quite dark. And I watched it this morning just upstairs in standard dynamic range, so how everybody else tends to watch it. And it is kind of like a bit of a tougher watch when we've got the curtains open and stuff like that. But generally, yeah, it was a good episode. And I just wonder if maybe they had that kind of ending possibly because they didn't know maybe that they were going to get a second season or not.
Personally, I think they probably knew they were going to get at least 2 seasons. I don't know. Yeah. We did do a Bad Batch roundtable earlier in the year with 2 of the producers, and Brad Rao did say it's a multi-season show. So even then, when that was all said, the season was probably wrapped and in the can. This has probably been in the can for 18 months, to be fair.
Yeah.
They've probably got season 2 already done. So I think so. But the peril was definitely there. The visuals and the music, so fantastic. The visuals go without saying. We sort of applaud it every week. So we're kind of getting spoilt now with these amazing visuals. But with the music, they've really sort of folded in some classic motifs and moments that really heighten the action because it's so evocative of other stuff. The episode a couple of weeks ago on the Imperial base, it was very Death Star, and you see the Imperial Commando come in and all that sort of stuff. So they've really been well chosen with those moments. But in terms of story, yes, you're right. It was fairly straightforward. The escape, every time they came across an obstacle, you knew that the Bats had it within them to figure it out. One of them was going to figure it out. It was either going to be brute strength by opening the door like Wrecker did, or tech figuring stuff out, Crosshair shooting the cable down to get AZ and Omega as well.
Just as we're talking about music, I especially thought on the second time around, really good musical decision. But actually, when he does that and he's pulling her up, there's no music. There was a slight alternate version of a Bad Batch theme when Omega kind of opens up the canister and starts swimming down to get the droid. But then actually when he fires a shot and he pulls him up, there's no music. So it's not like a big heroic fanfare thing. Then you actually do see the rest of the batch have basically all got their blasters trained on him because they don't actually know what he's going to do. So I was like, that's a really clever thing, because I thought if they had the fanfare and the kind of a big hurrah, then it's like, oh yeah, he's clearly rejoined. Yes. But the fact that they didn't, it was still up in the air.
It was a brilliant moment. Literally, as we were watching it and he pulls the gun out, I actually just said it out loud, and I'm glad there was nobody else in the room, because I was like, are you effing kidding me? Really? after all this, he does that? Because I'm thinking, is there an Imperial ship he's seen that we haven't seen? Or, is he prepared to sacrifice himself? Yeah. Something. And then when he does that, it was like, fantastic. That was very cool. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they didn't telegraph it in that sense. You really didn't know what was going to happen. And like you say about the brooding, all the way through the episode, him and Hunter are always going to be sparring, because even when they were on the same page, even in the Clone Wars Season 7, you knew that Crosshair was never thrilled at having to take orders from Hunter. I mean, Wrecker's the one that actually says it. We would have had you back. And there's always these moments of Crosshair is still figuring it out. You think he's still figuring it out, because there are moments where he's sort of sitting there with his head down and he's looking a bit despondent and a bit thoughtful.
Dejected.
Personally, I think he thinks he can't come back, because if he does, he'll just be in the same role he was in before. He's not going to be happy being number 2 to Hunter, which he kind of was. Tech's the one that stepped up over the season.
Oh, yeah. Especially the last half, that little kind of exchange that Tech has with Crosshair was really interesting, and maybe a little bit meta, kind of saying, like, just because
I understand you, I don't have to agree with you.
Exactly, yeah. And I thought that was quite interesting. And again, it's kind of like that's a slightly different side of Tech. He doesn't really kind of express himself beyond the technical stuff, really, does he? He doesn't really comment on other stuff. So that, the fact that, she said that, and that was a nice moment. And it was a nice moment even with Wrecker, because in some respect, Wrecker is he's kind of got the heart of the batch a little bit. So, and the fact he just came out and kind of said that, we would have taken you back, I think was a nice moment. And so it's not like at any point anybody's kind of blocking Crosshair to come back. And obviously Omega's there doing the Omega thing, which is like spelling it all out to him and saying, if they're your brothers and, we want you. And Crosshair is, like you said, he doesn't feel he can come back. I still don't even know if he wants to come back, or at least he doesn't want to come back to them not join the Empire. He wants them to fold back into the Empire. And I guess maybe in some respects, pick up where they last left off, really, I guess. Maybe it's a change thing for him as well, because everything's changed around him, and he's probably thinking the constant is, well, if I do my job, if I follow orders, that's easy for me to do, and I don't need to necessarily have to be affected or be too much, aware of what's going on around me, whether or not I like it or not.
Hi, this is Guy Henry, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
Maybe Crosshair as a personality is a bit more linear in that respect, whereas you've got Omega's come in. As the seasons progress, she comes in as a complete innocent. Episode 2, she's picking up dirt going, what's this? Because she's never seen dirt, because there's always a droid to clean up the corridors in Kamino. And you've watched her learn about the galaxy, and we've watched it essentially in real time, if you want to call it that, because it's a very linear kind of show. Also, her wide-eyed acceptance and learning about the world around her has helped the batch learn about not only the galaxy outside of being a soldier, but also about personal relationships. You think what Crosshair would have learned if he had have stayed with them? It would have changed him as a character as well. He's not had that. He's just gone straight back into the ranks.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
now he's in the ranks of he's not trusted anymore. I mean, Rampart don't give a stuff. Crosshair's the only one that can't see that he is completely expendable. But from his point of view, I guess as a soldier, he would view himself as expendable anyway. If they had no weapons and a handful of spoons, they'd dive in and attack a wampus. They're going to do it because that's how they're bred and that's how they're trained, isn't it? They'll just do it. That's what they do. The good soldiers follow orders. But now they've got way more options. They're working as a unit. And because, or even despite the fact that Omega has kind of altered the balance of the team and fit in, and now they've adjusted their skill sets to accommodate a new member that isn't a super sniper like Crosshair, but somebody who's a different type like Omega. And also because she's learning quickly about the world and she's not afraid to put her point of view forward, and always in a very grown-up way. But she also knows, like we saw the other week when Hunter said, you and Wrecker back to the ship, no questions. And she just accepts it. There was a moments in the season, mid-season, when she'd go back to Sid and she'd have her head down on the bar going, it's not fair. And you didn't see that very much from Omega, which was kind of refreshing because you kind of expect it from kid characters in drama and fiction. So I think Omega's been brilliant for the batch, but great for us as a viewer to follow.
There was a time in this episode, I think especially, because really at the end of this last 2 parts, she has really kind of stepped up, and you can see the skills that she's picked up along the way in this season has really started to give her the confidence and the notion to be able to actually think outside the box. Then you have Crosshair, who probably does echo quite a large portion of some of the Star Wars fandom, when he's like, are we taking orders from a kid now? That is exactly what a lot of people have kind of been saying. She kind of does get to a point in this episode where she's leading the team, but then I think she does that slightly frustrating thing whereby which shows her age by she just opens up a canister in the middle of 50 feet of water, and she just goes off to obviously save the droid, which I guess is altruistic in itself. But then it's like, that's one thing that, as a squad member and as somebody who is part of a military operation and stuff like that, you're trained to not do anything that's going to put the lives of your squad in jeopardy because you want to do something. It was in character with her, but it worked against her as well, because I was just like, you're never going to be able to kind of like drag that droid all the way back up to the surface. I mean, that droid's probably quite heavy, probably a good couple of kilos, and she is a slight character. She's never looked physically strong per se. So I was like, it was a frustrating moment for me. But, I think at the same time, this last story has really shown how she has grown and developed and like you said, integrated into the rest of the batch.
She's the optimist of the group. Look at all of them. Wrecker he's like the big cuddly teddy bear, isn't he? He's sort of last week, you've got a point. Yeah, Tech's got a point. Yeah, Wrecker's got a point. He's not a leader. He's not an alpha character in that sense. Hunter is, but Hunter's wise enough to know that he's learning a lot about what the galaxy is about. Tech is very much a pragmatist and very much a realist, and Echo's probably the most seasoned of the lot, I would say. It feels like Echo's seen them and lost the most when you look at what's happened to him. But Omega has just come in like this. I mean, she just started off as an innocent, and there were moments early on in the season that were a little bit la 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 la, and it was a little bit like twee. I thought, oh no, please don't go down this path, because
with an Exu and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's right. And she makes that first great appearance in the first double episode, which I agree. I think they should have done this as a double episode to finish it off, the first season off. But as she's grown and learned, and I mean, Sid's the one that picks up a lot of it, basically saying to the rest of the batch, you've got a real little brain box here. This kid is really switched on, more than you guys are. I still think at this point, if it wasn't for Omega, they probably wouldn't have hung around with Sid so long, which helped them. It helped them a lot. They diverted from that mission to go and get Gregor. whilst on a mission for Sid, and we've not seen Sid since. So I'm looking forward to season 2 to see if they do pick that up, because they don't seem to me like the kind of guys that would just bin her off. And I don't think Omega would allow it. I think she'd be like, you do realise we still owe Sid. You know, we're back in debt to Sid now because we walked away from a mission. So I don't see them just ignoring that. Old Mantel's a great place to tell stories and such. So it's been fun going and investigating that a little bit more. Character dynamics has been so interesting in this show. And for me, by far, it's my favourite first season of a Star Wars show. I'd venture to say it's right up there with the very best of, I mean, season 4 Rebels, season 7 Clone Wars. Season 7 Clone Wars is going to take some beating. That was just magnificent, wasn't it? It's not that far away from those kind of levels. If you think of your best seasons of the Clone Wars, season 3 was a great season. Yeah, 3, 4, and 5 were great seasons, weren't they?
It's in that ballpark, yeah. I think it's really difficult for the first season to be the best season of a multi-season show.
True.
Just because we are, we've got to get used to those characters. We've got to get used to dynamics and stuff like that, I think, a little bit. And with that, then you can develop the characters a little bit more and things resonate more with the audience. But yeah, when it's been firing on all cylinders, it's really worked. And when it hasn't, it's been an enjoyable watch. I think what's nice is that with this, it kind of feels like this is almost like a bit of a gimme in some respects. It's like a bit like season 7 of the Clone Wars. It wasn't something that we were kind of expecting or hoping for. And we've got it, and actually what it's done is it's opened the galaxy up and opened up that real fertile ground right when the Empire's just forming, and it's really started to show us stuff that we haven't seen. So it's kind of done its job on that respect, I think. What I'd like to see, though, and the questions I have going forward is obviously, what kind of almost is the end game for the Bad Batch? Because at the moment, they kind of now possibly are back in debt with Sid, and they could kind of reconcile that off screen, and that might actually be the most sensible thing to do, would just be to kind of have a little bit of a jump in time, the kind of all square with Sid. But then what do they do? Ultimately, Hunter's main purpose is to look after his squad. He's kind of treading water a little bit. He's doing it and he's surviving, but they're not getting anywhere. They're now just kind of jobbing mercenaries, really. They don't have family to go back to. It doesn't feel like at the moment they are keen to join or fight the Empire. He just wants to make sure that everybody's all right. How long can they, as a show, carry on without it kind of feeling a little bit stale? There needs to be a little bit of forward momentum, and I think they need to have some kind of goal in mind for season 2.
It makes what Crosshair said make more sense, though, because he's a soldier with a mission. He knows he's working for the Empire, will do what he's asked and ordered to do, and he has a purpose, and that was his thing to Hunter, wasn't it? You've got no purpose. You've got no reason, because he probably doesn't realise that there are already, just months after the Empire has been initiated, the seeds of rebellion. That's the very earliest days of, we saw it in the cutscenes from Sith, didn't we? With Bail Organa and Padme and those characters, Mon Mothma. Those characters are starting to, they already initiate a rebellion or resistance or whatever you want to call it before the Empire is in. So you've got to think that there's going to be boots on the ground doing the similar thing. And of course, Cutler Quain, you saw Cut had disappeared and raised his family, and later on you see Gregor and Rex and those guys do a similar thing. Wolf, isn't it? 10 years on, sort of keeping their heads down and trying to stay out of the way. The Batch, to me, because they feel like a special ops unit, and they are the Bad Batch. They didn't come out the way they were supposed to, sort of thing. And they feel so much more unique and individual compared to Regs. It's like expecting Rambo to go and live in suburbia, and just do nothing about, just live the normal life and have cookouts on a Saturday. It's not going to happen. So the end goal, to me, feels like they will end up in the ranks of a rebel cell in a similar way to partisan rebels from Rogue One, or the characters, the Spectres from Rebels, that sort of thing. That feels like where they would go, because we're too far out for them to be a part of the Rebel Alliance, because the Rebel Alliance doesn't formalise for another sort of 15, near enough 20 years.
Exactly. We've got to do something. I mean, that's the thing. At some point or another, most soldiers want the quiet life, but those are human soldiers. These aren't human soldiers per se. These are, clone soldiers who have been bred specifically to do a job. They need to have some kind of purpose, but I think a slightly altruistic heart behind them, that it's clear that, because of what they've seen the Empire do to all their brothers, being Regs or not, they're going to be aligned more with a rebel sympathizer. So, I mean, and we in fairness, actually, we've seen Rex now and we've seen Gregor, but we haven't seen Wolf. So maybe Wolf will be a character who's going to pop up in season 2.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
And also, with the episode on Ryloth with Hauser, where he got captured and taken away, and it kind of feels like he was set up to be somebody. So you can kind of, I get the sense, we talked about it before about, you'll have your regs and your now enlisted men who are now coming into the ranks of the Empire from all around the galaxy, that there could be some sort of conflict in season 2 between those. That feels like something could happen.
When you look at the crew that we saw on the Venator Star Destroyer who got taken down to Polka City, they were all regs. And there's that one exchange with Admiral Rampart and a clone. Even though the clone's actually in a helmet, the body language clearly screamed that he was not completely okay with the fact they've just wiped out, everybody on that city. It would be really cool if we could actually see some kind of clone uprising. The problem is, and I've struggled with him for the whole season, I think really kind of a lead baddie, Admiral Rampart is so bloody bland. But the best thing that I can kind of liken him to is he's like one of those transformation managers who comes into big corporation, and speaking from experience, and their sole job is to basically get rid of the deadwood and reshuffle the structure and the organisation. That's it. And that's kind of, I feel like that's what he's kind of started to do with Operation War Mantle and bringing out the conscripts instead of the clones and stuff like that. But as a character, I mean, he's not very dynamic compared to, obviously the likes of Thrawn and even like Price and people like that. So I hope they do something a little bit more with him to give him a little bit more of a dimension, like in season 2 or something, because I don't know, he's just felt a bit one note for the whole season.
What's your sort of one-line description of season 1 of Bad Batch? Was it a satisfying season? Was it lacking in any way? How do you feel about it?
Definitely don't think it was lacking anything. There was some really nice surprises, and it's a real nice transitional series. I think it's that next logical step from the Clone Wars. We're now in a whole new era of Star Wars that we haven't really seen, and it's going to lead into hopefully cues and stuff that might be picked up on Andor, for instance, or even Kenobi. This is going to be one of those series that we might look back after we've got Andor and Kenobi and kind of go, if you haven't watched Bad Batch, you need to watch Bad Batch, because that helps to kind of show what happens in these series. So obviously that's what's really exciting me about this modern era of Star Wars, is the fact that actually we know that they're working on all cylinders to try and kind of get these things to kind of align and connect. So I think this is one of those kind of series, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with season 2. How about you?
So I really enjoyed it. I thought the animation was great. I thought the characters were excellent. Omega has charmed me way more than I thought a new character like that would. I'm invested in the Batch and their scenario and the characters and their relationships. I'm interested in that. It's the Imperial era, so the world building is absolutely fascinating. There was a mid-season point when it was like, oh, who's the guest star this week? That worried me, because season 2 of Mandalorian kind of started to do that a little bit, and it's a worry. I know it's a unified galaxy, but they keep bumping into people they know. But nevertheless, I really did enjoy season 1. We've got a lot to come. We've got Visions, we've got Terrifying Tales, Lego Star Wars, we've got Book of Boba Fett, we've probably got Kenobi and Andor before we get season 2 Bad Batch. So there's a lot of Star Wars to consume before we even get there, but I'm very much looking forward to season 2.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So, as he finishes work on Thor: Love and Thunder, Taika Waititi is now turning his attention to his next project, one of which will be his Star Wars film. And he did mention that he has a story. And I'll read out what he said. It's still in the exterior space stage, he laughs, basically, opening skull. He says, but we've got a story. I'm really excited because it feels very me. And the questioner says, have you married down your irreverent tone? Because obviously that's what he's known for. He says, I tend to go down that little sincerity alleyway in my films. I like to fool the viewer into thinking, it's this, and then going, damn it, you made me feel something. So basically, I think what he's saying there is that, yes, there's going to be the irreverence, there's going to be the humour, but he's telling us in a sort of a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of way, this is going to be fun, it's going to be exciting, there's going to be energy and excitement, but we're going to make you feel something. Guardians did that in 2014 and again in 2017. What do you think? Do you think that's the way he's going to take it?
possibly maybe not quite as extreme as like the Jojo Rabbit notion, but possibly like that, because that had a lot of heart. And obviously when people talk about Jojo Rabbit, they always talk about, you know, the imaginary Adolf Hitler, but actually the relationship between like the boy and his mother, that relationship has got real heart. And yeah, you know, obviously there's that real darkness to it at the end when, you know, he comes out on the street to find a hanging. I think there's definitely space in Star Wars for this. And the interesting thing is, the more I see that rock Star Wars logo that they've used with the kind of like the cracks in it and stuff, the more I really quite like it. Before I was kind of like, but actually it's kind of grown on me, and it's making me kind of wonder, yeah, you know, obviously when's it set? Where is it set? And obviously, you know, Taika's given none of that away. It will be interesting to see what he can do, and I think maybe just challenge the paradigms in Star Wars a little bit as well.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks Radio.
Well, one of the other projects that's ongoing at the moment is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Indira Varma, who's one of the stars of that show, started talking about the production. She was chatting to the Metro. She basically said that she feels like there's an independent movie vibe about being on set. So she admits she doesn't know much about Star Wars, but she does say, all she says is, I can't say anything about it, but Deborah Chow and Ewan McGregor on the acting side have somehow made it feel like an independent movie. Everyone has input and there are no fraying tempers. That's a very positive sounding summary of what it's like on the set. But what do you think of if it feeling like an indie movie? How do you think that's going to translate to the screen?
I mean, I suppose you've got to remember that Star Wars was pretty much an independent movie. Maybe what she's referring to is actually it's allowing Deborah Chow and Ewan McGregor and, you know, the cast and the crew the latitude to tell the story and create something without necessarily big studio interference. On something like Game of Thrones, there was probably a bit of that kind of interference, just because obviously how big it was for HBO, how much they hang their hat on that show really for the seasons that it was on. And with that, there kind of does become a restriction, doesn't there? You know, and we see it and hear it all the time about how like the studios want certain things to happen or characters to come across a certain way because it ticks a marketing demographic box or what have you. I think because Ewan has done Star Wars before, he's like the old hand on the set. Deborah's worked on The Mandalorian, you know, she's now kind of like seeped into that working style that they've kind of developed probably with The Mandalorian, and I'd imagine it's probably quite similar to that. So I think it's quite positive, and hopefully it means it will just bring out the best performances from all these actors when we get to see it.
That comment will be reflected more in the acting style. You know, you look at the original, there's a very natural feel. I know the actors, like Harrison always says, he can write this shit, but you can't say it sort of thing. But there's a very natural delivery, especially from Mark Hamill. This is where they live. This is the galaxy. This is the world where they live.
Exactly.
And everything is just kind of normal. We're seeing it for the first time, like Omega was in Bad Batch. But these other guys, it's just, oh, yeah, that's an elephant. Oh, yeah, that's a car. Whatever.
Yeah,
it's that
exactly.
normal. So my head tells me that's more what she's referring to. With stagecraft as well, there is a certain flexibility that you'd never had with any other process before. And Deborah Chow, having done all that work on Mando, is clearly very familiar with that process. And so she's, I'm guessing, has picked this up really quickly, has got a team around her that also understand it as well as she does, and can use that flexibility to give them some extra scope to try out different things, because it's all very good sitting there doing rehearsals, which I'm sure they all do, and going through the script and such. But when you're on set and that thing is around you, and you can suddenly go, why don't we try it from this angle? And Deborah's like, no, actually, why don't we try it from that angle? And the VFX guys go, yeah, give me 5 minutes. And they're just, you know what I mean? It feels, from what we've seen on Disney Gallery, and of course we've got another one of those coming soon, that's within their scope to do. So I think maybe that indie spirit, I mean, that is very gung-ho. Grab a camera, you've got 10 days and $200,000, film, make a movie sort of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not that. It feels like they've got a bit more scope to sort of try things.
I wonder how much Ewan in particular is looking at Alec Guinness's performance and Alec Guinness in A New Hope, and how much, you know, obviously like he was kind of doing, especially in Revenge of the Sith, was like lining up things so that actually, you know, you stop to really, you know, think about who's playing the character, and actually the character is kind of consistent enough. So that in itself is, I think, quite reassuring. So I'm so excited to see what we get. And the thing is, I don't want to kind of like have it now. I don't want them to rush it. I want them to kind of take their time, spend the time they need to get it right. And if that means that, you know, we get stuff later than we were hoping for, that's fine, because I much prefer really good Star Wars just to meet a streaming deadline.
Hi, this is John Morton from The Empire Strikes Back, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Huge news for Disney Plus. As of the 3rd of July, they announced that the streamer has passed 116 million subscribers. That means they've added an enormous 12.4 million in Q3 alone. They've got Japan having a full Disney Plus launch in October. Basically, they're at the very top end of their predictions for where they would be at this point. Revenues are up. Shows are coming willy-nilly. They do mention in the conversation, Bob Chapek on the Disney call did say that we will be getting Book of Boba Fett this year. There's been a few people wondering whether or not we would, but it is happening. What do you think of that? Just not a lot to say, really. It's a success story, and Star Wars is a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, when you think that Netflix has got something like 208 million subscribers,
yeah,
the fact that Disney Plus has 116 million in 2 years, basically.
2 years in November, yeah.
It's astounding. Obviously, the more numbers there are, I say it's great. Somebody who works in broadcast TV, not necessarily as great, but as a consumer, yeah, it's wonderful because the more subscribers they have and the more investment they can put into shows. And as we've seen, Disney Plus has been delivering some cracking shows. And I mean, even like the latest Marvel series, What If? I mean, that first episode with Captain Carter was amazing.
Yeah, it was. And like you say, Marvel have said there's more animation coming. We can only assume with Bad Batch being a success that there'll be more Star Wars animation coming. Nothing announced yet, but it's Celebration at the end of May, so fingers crossed we'll hear something by then. Although knowing Lucasfilm, they'll put a press release out the week before Celebration telling us what's coming, so who knows. But also, in addition, it's 2-year anniversary for Disney Plus on the 12th of November, so they're having a Disney Plus Day. We'll get the new Home Alone movie, Home Sweet Home Alone, great title. Jungle Cruise will enter its no-fee window on Disney Plus. There's other stuff coming along to incentivise even more people because their aim by 2024 is to have between 230 and 260 million subscribers. I mean, that, if nothing else, shows you the depth and breadth worldwide of Disney, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, big plans, and like I said, that's going up and above Netflix. So they're not kind of like just treading lightly in this. They're plunging full head on. But also what's going to be interesting to see just over the next couple of years, and hopefully as things maybe get back to some form of normality across the globe with vaccinations just generally going up for COVID and stuff like that, is obviously like the dynamic between Disney Plus and streaming services and like theatrical releases.
Yeah.
And that obviously for Star Wars could be a big thing because, we see in 2023 and what have you, Rogue Squadron actually land on Disney Plus, albeit at a premium, the same day as it, and it gets released into a theatre.
You'd like to think they'll organise and make sure that all the contracts are correctly sorted out because it's not been good PR with the Scarlett Johansson thing. But that being said, yesterday it was announced that Emma Stone has agreed to do a sequel to Cruella. There was talk of her having a similar issue. So clearly these wrinkles are being ironed out. Jungle Cruise coming to regular Disney Plus by November. I mean, it only came out a couple of weeks ago. We're in August.
Yeah.
3-4 months, and there it is for £8 a month. Insane.
I mean, Black Widow is now on Sky Store. The whole kind of way that, films are marketed and released and, available to people is changing. Me as a traditional cinema goer, I hope that there's space for everything, to be honest, for those who want to go to a cinema and see it on, a super big screen and, with Dolby Atmos and all that kind of stuff, it's fine. And if you're happy and content to watch it at home in whatever your setup is, I don't necessarily see a problem because ultimately they're still getting the revenue one way or another. It's just, it's through different channels. And like you said, as long as, the talent and everybody else knows what that means for their contracts and stuff like that, then that's fine. So I think it's all promising, really. I mean, I don't see a negative with this whatsoever.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
We didn't have one last week. In fact, we haven't had one for a couple of weeks. But today we do have a listener's question. And this is from somebody a bit famous. This is from Adam Christopher, the author. And he asks, how did Boba Fett get to Cloud City before the Falcon if he was following them from the Imperial fleet? So he's referring to the scene in The Empire Strikes Back when the Falcon's hanging on the back of the Star Destroyer. Boba Fett is in amongst all the wreckage that gets dumped before they jump to hyperspace. And obviously the Falcon's heading to Cloud City. But how does Boba Fett get there before the Falcon?
I guess, and maybe I'm thinking really logically, but we know the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive is on the fritz, so they've got a limp to Cloud City. The question is, does Boba Fett just hang back a little bit and until he's pretty confident that he knows where they're going, i.e. there's nowhere they're going to go to wherever or what have you. There's only one real logical place, and you assume that maybe his experience with the smuggler and the underworld, he could probably work out fairly quickly, but actually maybe they're headed to Bespin and to Cloud City. And because the Slave One has a working hyperdrive, he just jumps ahead and contacts the Empire on the way to kind of say, this is where I think they're going. There's no other real way they're going to go anywhere else. Get there and set it up. If we dig a little bit deeper, scanners on the Falcon and Slave One. You know what it's sometimes like in like these random horror films where they're, a car's driving down a road and there's another car behind them.
Yeah.
And it's clear that that car is following them. With Star Trek, for instance, the scanners tend to always pick up ships, and you wonder what kind of scanning countermeasures maybe the Slave One's got to maybe kind of mask the ship's shadow or something.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if, how far does Boba Fett let them kind of have a lead, really, as such? I mean, I suppose he's always going to have the advantage because he's got the hyperdrive and he knows they can't just jump off. Han or Chewie's not just looking out a window and goes, oh, there's somebody following us behind her. That's a bit odd. What Fett does, or how far back he has to stay out of their sensor range, but then keep a decent beat on where they're going.
And it's a great question because it's not something I'd really deeply considered before, because it kind of feels obvious, but by the same token, it's not. War of the Bounty Hunters at the moment, they've expanded upon what we remember from Shadows of the Empire tremendously in that comic series, and we're only halfway through it. So, they've really expanded in the storyline and thrown in all sorts of elements. And we've talked about this before. Empire is one of those weird films. They've never really nailed down exactly how long Empire takes place over. Because for Luke to have learnt what he learned, he must have been on Dagobah for a significant amount of time. The Falcon was in that cave inside the slug for a significant amount of time. You're just limping along at sub-light speeds. It's going to take a long time to get to anywhere. It just is. So it's probably, logically, blindingly obvious that the only place they can go is Bespin. And also, Fett being Fett, he would know that Han and Lando had a past. He'd know that Calrissian was running Bespin, because it's not like Lando was, not shouting about it from the rooftops, because he was just doing his thing. In the underworld, there's probably all sorts of deals going on Bespin. So Calrissian's on Cloud City and Solo knows Calrissian. So it's probably very obvious. But going back to your point about the sensors, I mean, the Falcon had a really improved sensor suite, mega improved. So they would be able to pick up ships way out. By the same token, so does Slave One. I'm saying that, and I'm not supposed to, but I'm calling it Slave One. So does Slave One. And you've got to imagine that Django, and then following on from him, Boba, would have really impressive countermeasures. Like you say, we've seen the countermeasures in Attack of the Clones. We saw it in The Mandalorian, but physical countermeasures. But in terms of sensors, he's probably masking the ship tremendously. So I think that's probably an element of it. And like you say, it gets so far and it's like there's nothing else in the system. He's got to be going to Cloud City. How easy for Boba to just jump ahead to Cloud City, land, alert the Empire, they jump in. And that's why Vader's waiting for them when they walk in the dining room, because they've already got ahead. They've had a meeting with Calrissian and made the threats to him. Poor guy. That whole scenario could happen whilst they're just tootling along in second gear because the hyperdrive isn't working.
Travel time in the Star Wars universe, it's a tricky and it's seemingly a non-linear thing. I've either read or it's been passed on in conversation, but I was kind of led to believe that, it took them about either 3 or 6 months to get from where they were when the Empire departed to Bespin. So that's a long time to just be sat, cooped up in the Falcon. And I mean, obviously, space is a big place. So you don't imagine they would have done any detours, because otherwise you probably would think that they could have got their hyperdrive fixed at another port somewhere. So the fact that Bespin is the only logical place to go or safe place to hide. I mean, I suppose maybe actually there are other planets around, but it's like how sympathetic they are to the Empire or to not to the Empire. That would have an effect, because you don't want to go somewhere which is kind of like an Imperial stronghold. So it's a curious one. I'll be interested to see how, the official word is on this. And actually, like you said, we might even see something like this in a comic or a book at some point. I'm guessing, authors and what have you will be looking to see, where potential story gaps could be kind of used to tell an offshoot. Does Boba Fett go off somewhere and track down a few other bounties and then pick up with Han once he knows where he is? There's going to be a fairly linear trajectory between where the Falcon is and Bespin, so he could fly off and do some stuff and come back and pick him up and go, oh yeah, he's still crawling his way to Bespin. Interestingly, whose choice was it then to let them get to Bespin? Because really, what is the benefit for the Empire of actually letting them get to Bespin, rather than just Boba Fett contacting the Empire and saying, they're on the way to Bespin, this is their trajectory, why didn't you just fly a couple of Star Destroyers in now? Because the Falcon can't go anywhere. If, like, a couple of Star Destroyers just jumped out of nowhere, you'd be caught short enough and maybe get captured. Surely the end result's the same, is it not? You know,
it is. That's the logic of The Last Jedi. In that you look at The Last Jedi and you go, well, why didn't they just jump ahead in hyperspace? And they've got a 60 kilometre wide starship and dozens of Star Destroyers. They'll just send a couple of Star Destroyers ahead to block them off and pick them off. And also, I don't suppose Lucas and Kazdan were expecting us to think of it this deeply. This is definitely it's definitely a writer's question, isn't it, from Adam?
Yeah.
I suppose if you look at Bespin as a location, you'd think, well, there's a carbon freezing chamber. Maybe Vader was aware of that and was thinking that's a great way to transport, Luke to the Emperor. But while Solo's here, let's test it first. So maybe there's an element of that. Maybe that's too convenient. I don't know. It makes more sense to do what they did at the start of A New Hope and just chase them down with the Star Destroyer and bring them in, because they ain't going to get away. I mean, the Falcon made a pretty good fist. They did get away from 3 Star Destroyers, went through an asteroid field. So they're probably a little bit reticent of trying that again, because there would be some significant damage. And a few Star Destroyer commanders probably got throttled by Vader. One got wiped out by that huge asteroid. So they're probably a little bit... get them on the ground. They're easy to control when they're on the ground. There's maybe a tactical element to that. But also, Vader being Vader, it means he can bring Cal Rissing into it and use him. And you don't know what they know of the Han-Lando relationship either, because if where we left them in Solo is where they left each other, and this is just sort of 4 or 5 years later, and this is the first time they're meeting since then, you could easily contrive stories in between if you wanted to. But it's kind of said that is the next meeting. There's enough of a relationship. There was clearly a kind of grudging respect, and they went through something big. Lando was part of the Kessel Run, the record-breaking Kessel Run as well, if you want to put it that way. I think there's a few angles on this. It's a really good question, because it's not as logical and it's not as obvious as you might think, because, Boba Fett knows the area and he's got a hyperdrive and the Falcon doesn't. But look at the left turns they took when they left Hoth, evading the destroyers for long enough that they latch onto the back of a destroyer and do that. Be very interesting to see how that plays out. Great question. I'm glad we had that one in.
As we leave Topolka City at the bottom of the Kamino Sea, I think it's time for us to head off into the sunset for this week. So that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much for listening. And also thank you to Adam for that really quite interesting question that he fired over to Mark earlier on this week. Of course, as always, we do appreciate the questions. And so if you want to send one in this week, he's got his script in front of him, so he should be able to rattle it off pretty quickly and pretty easily. So Mark, can you let the listeners know how they can send us a question?
You'd like to think I could do it easily, but I'll give it a go. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. Very good. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds @Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Now, quickly, before we move on to anything else, on the site, when you go to a article that mentions Making Tracks or Desert Planet or any of the shows going forward, you will find a little box, and if you click on the box, you can leave an audio snippet for us. So if you have a question, in addition to sending it to radio@fanthatracks.com, you can also leave us a voice message, which, of course, we will play out on the show. So if you go to any of those articles, click on the voice message, leave it with us, and we'll ask that question, maybe not the following week, but within the next couple of weeks as we work through our questions. So please do that. Remember, tune into our weekly Fanthatracks news show, Good Morning Tatooine, live Sunday evenings, 9 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook and YouTube. There wasn't an episode this week because Brian has just spent a month redesigning the site and doing all the server work, and he's having a little break, a well-deserved break, but it will be back next week. So next weekend, as you listen to this, Good Morning Tatooine will be back. So make sure you tune in, and hopefully we'll see you then.
Just like James Bond, Brian will return. Thank you for that, my friend. And of course, actually, everybody, leave a voicemail. That would be fantastic. Don't be shy. Honestly, if me and Mark can talk bollocks for the next 45 minutes to an hour each week, I'm sure you've got enough confidence to just leave us a quick 30 or... Yeah.
Mark, I've got to cut through that. We didn't talk bollocks. We talked about AZ. We might have mentioned R2-D2. We usually mention C-3PO. We definitely didn't talk bollocks this week. We had no mention of any of the Han Solo books, to be fair.
No, actually, we haven't talked about any of the Brian Daley novels. So, in fact, we haven't talked about bollocks. And, it's all golden, classic Star Wars radio as always.
Goldenrods all the way.
Definitely. And that is the title for this week's episode. So, on that note, a rather dubious note, I think, let's call it a day. Thank you very much for listening once again. Mark, stay safe, look after yourself. And everybody else, wear a mask. Don't lick those doorknobs. Get vaccinated, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Don't lick the doorknob. That's almost a better title than Goldenrods all the way.